sails groaned against the rutted Mississippi road as thick storm clouds gathered overhead like vultures circling carrion. The air hung heavy with the promise of rain and the oppressive weight of summer heat that seemed to press down on everything it touched. Elias pressed his shackled hands against the rough wooden planks of the wagon bed, his dark eyes scanning the landscape that had haunted his dreams for 15 long years. Cotton fields stretched endlessly on both sides of the dirt road, their white bowls ready for harvest under the merciless southern sun. The plants swayed in the humid breeze like an ocean of suffering, each row representing countless hours of back-breaking labor under the overseer's whip. In the distance, he could see the bent figures of field hands moving through the crops, their movements mechanical and weary, their songs of endurance floating across the delta like prayers to a god who seemed to have forgotten them. "Get down, boy," barked Overseer Jameson from his position beside the wagon driver. His weathered face was twisted into the permanent scowl that had terrorized slaves for more than 2 decades at Fairview Plantation. Deep lines etched by years of cruelty and whiskey marked his features, and his pale blue eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had long ago stopped seeing slaves as human beings. "Welcome back to hell." Elias stepped down slowly, his bare feet sinking into the red clay that seemed to pulse with the blood and sweat of generations. The earth felt warm beneath his soles, almost alive, as if it remembered every drop of suffering that had been spilled upon it. The iron shackles around his ankles clinked softly as he moved, a sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat during the long journey from Louisiana. The plantation house loomed before him like a monument to human cruelty. A grand white structure with towering columns that stood like sentinels over the fields where hundreds of souls toiled in bondage. The building's pristine facade seemed to mock the suffering that surrounded it, its elegant architecture built on a foundation of human misery. Spanish moss draped from the ancient oak trees that lined the approach, creating shadows that danced in the afternoon light like the ghosts of the dead. "Master Whitmore's been waiting for you," Jameson continued, spitting a stream of tobacco juice that splattered dangerously close to Elias's feet. The brown liquid stained the red earth like old blood, and the overseer's yellowed teeth gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Paid good money to bring you back from that sugar plantation in Louisiana. Says you got skills we need for the harvest season." As they walked toward the slave quarters, Elias caught glimpses of the plantation's daily rhythm. Children with hollow eyes and distended bellies peered from behind cotton plants, their small hands already calloused from work that should have been play. Women bent over wash basins, scrubbed clothes until their knuckles bled, while men hauled water from the well with shoulders permanently bowed by the weight of their burdens. The air was thick with the sounds and smells of plantation life, the crack of whips in the distance, the mournful work songs that helped slaves maintain their rhythm and their sanity, the acrid smoke from cooking fires, and underneath it all, the ever-present scent of fear that permeated every corner of Fairview like a poisonous fog. "You remember this place?" Jameson asked, his voice carrying a note of cruel curiosity. "Of course, you was just a little pickaninny when Master sold you off." Probably don't remember much of anything, but Elias did remember. Fragments of memory flickered through his mind, like candlelight in a storm, a woman's gentle voice singing lullabies in the darkness, warm hands braiding his hair while she hummed spirituals, the taste of cornbread shared in secret when the overseers weren't watching. Most vivid of all was the memory of being torn from those loving arms in the middle of the night, his 3-year-old voice screaming for his mama as strange hands carried him away to a wagon that would take him to Louisiana and 15 years of exile. "Mama," he whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it, carrying with it all the longing and loss of a childhood stolen too soon. "Your mama's long dead, boy," Jameson sneered, his voice cutting through Elias's memories like a blade. "Died birthing another one of Master's bastards about 10 years back. Bled out on the cabin floor like a stuck pig. You best forget whatever memories you think you got, 'cause ain't nothing here for you but work and pain." The casual cruelty of the words hit Elias like a physical blow. His mother, the woman whose face he could barely remember, but whose love had sustained him through the darkest moments of his exile, was gone. Dead and buried in unmarked ground, while he labored in the cane fields of Louisiana, never knowing that the last connection to his past had been severed forever. The slave quarters stretched before them like a vision from Dante's Inferno, a row of weathered cabins that housed the plantation's workforce in conditions that would have been considered inhumane for livestock. The structures were little more than wooden boxes with gaps between the boards that offered no protection from wind, rain, or the mosquitoes that swarmed up from the nearby swamp. Each cabin housed multiple families, privacy being a luxury that slaves were not permitted to enjoy. Children with hollow eyes peered from doorways while their mothers quickly pulled them inside, recognizing the approach of the overseer and knowing that visibility often led to trouble. The women's faces bore the marks of lives lived in constant fear, premature aging, eyes that had seen too much suffering, and the careful blankness that slaves learned to wear like armor against their oppressors. "You'll bunk with old Samuel," Jameson said, pointing to a cabin at the end of the row that looked slightly more dilapidated than the others. "He'll teach you the rules. Break 'em, and you'll wish you never came back to Mississippi." Old Samuel emerged from the cabin as they approached, his back permanently bent from decades of labor in the cotton fields. His hair was white as the cotton he picked, and his hands were gnarled like old tree roots, but his eyes remained sharp and knowing. He had survived longer than most slaves at Fairview, and his longevity had earned him a grudging respect, even from the overseers. "This here's Elias," Jameson announced. "He's your responsibility now, old man." "Make sure he learns his place quick, or you'll both be sorry." Samuel nodded silently, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. He had learned long ago that the key to survival was invisibility, and he had perfected the art of appearing harmless and subservient while maintaining his dignity in the secret places of his heart. As Jameson walked away, his boots crunching on the hard-packed earth, Samuel studied the young man who would be sharing his meager living space. He saw strength in Elias's shoulders, intelligence in his eyes, and something else, a spark of defiance that hadn't been completely extinguished by years of bondage. "Come inside, son," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom and sorrow. "We got things to talk about." The interior of the cabin was even more depressing than its exterior. A single room served as bedroom, kitchen, and living space for Samuel, and now Elias. The floor was dirt, packed hard by years of foot traffic, and the walls were bare wood with gaps that let in wind, rain, and insects. A small fireplace provided the only source of heat and cooking, while two straw mattresses on the floor served as beds. "Ain't much," Samuel said, settling onto one of the mattresses with a grunt of pain. "But it's home, such as it is." Elias sat on the other mattress, feeling the straw poke through the thin fabric. The accommodations were actually better than what he'd had in Louisiana, where field hands often slept on the ground with nothing but a thin blanket for comfort. "Tell me about my mama," Elias said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Jameson said she died, but I need to know about her." Samuel's eyes grew distant, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from his face. Celia was her name. "Prettiest woman on the plantation, with a voice like an angel when she sang. She loved you something fierce, boy. Used to hold you close and tell you stories about freedom, about a place where children could run and play without fear." "What happened to her?" "Master Whitmore took a fancy to her when you was about 2 years old. Wasn't nothing she could do about it. Slaves don't get to say no to their masters. She tried to resist at first, but..." Samuel's voice trailed off, the implications clear. "She had another child," Elias said, understanding flooding through him. "A little girl, born about a year after you were sold away. Celia named her Amara, said it meant eternal in some language she heard from a traveling preacher. She hoped that child would live forever, that somehow she'd escape the fate that claimed so many of us." "Where is she now, this Amara?" Samuel's expression grew troubled. "She's here, but she ain't in the quarters with us. Master Whitmore took her into the big house when she was old enough to work. Made her a house servant, said she was too pretty to waste in the fields." The implications of those words sent a chill down Elias's spine. He had seen what happened to pretty slave girls who caught their master's attention, and the thought of his half-sister suffering that fate made his hands clench into fists. "Easy, son," Samuel said, recognizing the anger building in the young man's eyes. "Anger's a luxury we can't afford here. It'll get you killed faster than anything else." "How do you stand it?" Elias asked, his voice raw with emotion. "How do you wake up every day and pretend this is acceptable?" "By remembering that survival is its own form of resistance," Samuel replied. "Every day we live, every breath we take, every song we sing, it's all proof that they ain't broken us completely." And by keeping hope alive that someday, somehow, things will change. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of singing drifted across the quarters from one of the other cabins. A woman's voice, rich and mournful, rose in a spiritual that spoke of crossing over Jordan and finding peace on the other side. Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that seemed to lift the very air around them. "That's how we survive," Samuel said softly. "We sing, we remember." We love each other as best we can, and we never, ever give up hope. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain began to fall in heavy drops that drummed against the cabin's thin roof, and lightning flickered in the distance like the wrath of an angry god. The temperature dropped slightly, providing the first relief from the oppressive heat that anyone had felt in days. "Storm's coming," Samuel observed, settling back on his mattress. "Always seems to storm when something important's about to happen. Been that way since I was a boy." Elias lay down on his own mattress, staring up at the ceiling where rainwater was already beginning to drip through the gaps in the roof. The sound of the storm mixed with the distant singing to create a symphony of sorrow and hope that seemed to capture the essence of life at Fairview Plantation. As he closed his eyes and tried to find sleep, Elias's mind wandered to the half-sister he had never known existed. Somewhere in the big house, a young woman named Amara was probably lying awake just as he was, perhaps wondering about the family she had lost, perhaps dreaming of freedom just as their mother had taught him to do. He didn't know that at that very moment, Amara was indeed awake, standing at the window of her small room in the servants' quarters of the plantation house. She was staring out at the storm, feeling an inexplicable restlessness that she couldn't understand. Something had changed today, some shift in the fabric of her world that she couldn't identify, but could feel in her bones. As lightning illuminated the slave quarters in the distance, she pressed her hand against the glass and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, a prayer for protection, for understanding, and for the family she had never known but somehow still missed. Neither sibling knew that fate was already weaving the threads of their story together, creating a tapestry of love and tragedy that would echo through the generations. The storm that raged outside was nothing compared to the tempest that was about to engulf their lives, changing everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. In the morning, the sun would rise on a new chapter in the history of Fairview Plantation, a chapter written in blood and tears, in forbidden love and terrible secrets, in the kind of tragedy that only slavery could create and only love could transcend. But for now, Brother and sister slept in their separate worlds, unaware that their reunion was only hours away, and that when it came, it would set in motion events that would curse Fairview Plantation for generations to come. The rain continued to fall, washing the red clay clean for a brief moment before it would be stained again with the suffering of those who called this place home. And in the distance, thunder rolled across the Mississippi Delta like the voice of judgment itself, promising that the sins of Fairview would not go unpunished forever. Dawn broke over Fairview Plantation with the reluctant grey light of a world that seemed perpetually shrouded in sorrow. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a landscape washed clean but somehow more desolate than before. Puddles of red-tinged water dotted the yard between the slave quarters and the big house, reflecting the pale sky like mirrors of blood. Elias woke to the sound of the plantation bell, its harsh bronze voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. The bell had been calling slaves to work for over 50 years, and its tone seemed to carry the accumulated weight of all that suffering, each clang a reminder that another day of bondage had begun. "Time to earn your keep," old Samuel said, already pulling on his worn work clothes. His movements were stiff and painful, the legacy of decades spent bent over cotton plants under the merciless southern sun. First day's always the hardest. After that, it just gets worse. The old man's attempt at humor fell flat in the grey morning light. Elias dressed quickly in the rough cotton clothes that had been provided for him. Pants that were too short, and a shirt that had been patched so many times, it was more patch than original fabric. The clothes smelled of lye soap and the sweat of previous wearers, a reminder that even something as basic as clothing was not truly his own. Outside, the plantation was coming to life with the mechanical precision of a well-oiled machine, designed to extract maximum labor from human beings. Slaves emerged from their cabins like ghosts, their faces already set in the careful masks of subservience that would protect them through another day. Children who should have been playing were already heading to the fields to pick cotton, their small hands more nimble than adult fingers when it came to avoiding the sharp thorns that guarded the white gold. "Stay close and keep your mouth shut," Samuel advised, as they joined the stream of workers heading toward the fields. "Jameson's got his eye on you, and he's looking for any excuse to make an example. New slaves always get tested early." The cotton fields stretched endlessly in all directions, row upon row of plants heavy with bolls, ready for harvest. The work was backbreaking, bending over constantly to pick the cotton, while avoiding the thorns that could slice flesh to ribbons, dragging heavy sacks that grew heavier with each handful of cotton, all while the sun beat down with an intensity that seemed designed to break the human spirit. Elias's hands, soft from years of lighter work in Louisiana, were bleeding within the first hour. The thorns found every vulnerable spot, and the rough cotton sacks chafed against his shoulders until the skin was raw. But he gritted his teeth and continued working, knowing that any sign of weakness would bring Jameson's attention and the kiss of the overseer's whip. "You're doing good, son," Samuel whispered during a brief moment when the overseer was distracted. "Just remember, the cotton don't care about your pain, and neither do they. Save your strength for what matters." As the morning wore on, Elias began to understand the rhythm of plantation life. The work songs that the slaves sang weren't just for entertainment. They helped coordinate the picking, provided a way to communicate without the overseer's understanding, and most importantly, they kept hope alive in hearts that had every reason to despair. "Swing low, sweet chariot," a woman's voice began, rich and mournful, "coming for to carry me home." Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that seemed to lift the very air around them. The song spoke of deliverance, of a chariot that would carry them away from their suffering, and every slave in the field understood its deeper meaning. It was a song about the Underground Railroad, about escape, about the promise that someday, somehow, freedom would come. Elias was so absorbed in the work and the music that he almost missed the commotion that erupted near the plantation house. Shouting voices carried across the fields, followed by the sound of breaking glass that made every slave freeze in place. In the world of the plantation, unexpected sounds usually meant trouble for someone. "Clumsy girl!" Master Whitmore's voice boomed across the yard, his anger carrying clearly in the still morning air. That vase was worth more than your worthless life. Through the heat, shimmer rising from the cotton fields, Elias could see a young woman kneeling on the ground near the big house, frantically gathering pieces of what appeared to be shattered porcelain. Her dark skin gleamed with perspiration, and her hair was pulled back in the neat style that marked her as a house servant rather than a field hand. Even at a distance, there was something about her that made Elias's breath catch in his throat. The way she moved, the curve of her neck, the desperate grace with which she tried to repair the irreparable. It all seemed familiar in a way that defied explanation. When she looked up, their eyes met across the expanse of cotton fields and red clay. Time seemed to stop. Amara felt the breath leave her lungs as she stared at the stranger in the fields. Something about his face, the strong line of his jaw, the depth of his dark eyes, the way he held his head with a dignity that slavery hadn't been able to break, stirred memories she thought were lost forever. A flash of a child's laughter echoing through her dreams, the warmth of someone holding her close when she was small, a voice whispering her name in the darkness of half-remembered nightmares. The connection was immediate and inexplicable, like recognizing a song she had never heard but somehow knew by heart. Her hands trembled as she continued gathering the broken pieces of porcelain, but her eyes remained fixed on the young man in the cotton field who was staring back at her with the same expression of confused recognition. "Amara!" Constance Whitmore's voice cut through the moment like a whip crack. The master's wife appeared on the veranda, her pale face flushed with the kind of anger that came from having her morning routine disrupted. She was a thin, nervous woman who had never quite adjusted to life on a plantation, and she took out her frustrations on the house servants with a cruelty that was all the more vicious for being petty. "Stop gawking and clean up this mess," Constance continued, her voice rising to a pitch that made the dogs in the yard whimper. "And you'll work without supper tonight for your carelessness. Perhaps hunger will teach you to be more careful with valuable things." "Yes, ma'am," Amara whispered, but her eyes remained fixed on Elias until Overseer Jameson's whip cracked in the air like thunder, forcing the field hands back to their work. The rest of the morning passed in a haze for both of them. Elias found himself constantly glancing toward the big house, hoping for another glimpse of the young woman who had stirred something deep in his soul. Amara went about her duties mechanically, her mind replaying that moment of connection over and over, trying to understand why a stranger's face could feel so familiar. As the sun reached its zenith and the heat became almost unbearable, the field hands were allowed a brief respite for their midday meal. They gathered in whatever shade they could find, sharing meager portions of cornbread and water while trying to restore their strength for the afternoon's labor. "You seen something that caught your eye?" Samuel asked, noticing the way Elias kept looking toward the plantation house. "The house girl," Elias admitted. "There's something about her." Samuel's expression grew troubled. "That's Amara. I told you about her last night. She's your mama's other child, your half-sister." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. The connection he had felt, the inexplicable attraction, it suddenly made terrible sense. Blood calling to blood, family recognizing family, even when the mind couldn't understand what the heart already knew. "She don't know about you," Samuel continued quietly. "Master Whitmore made sure of that. Far as she knows, she ain't got no family left in this world." "I have to tell her," Elias said, his voice urgent with need. "You have to be careful," Samuel warned. "House servants and field hands don't mix, and Jameson's already got his eye on you. You start sniffing around the big house, and you'll bring trouble down on both your heads." But even as Samuel spoke the words of caution, he could see that it was already too late. The connection between the siblings was too strong to ignore, too powerful to deny. Fate had brought them back together after 15 years of separation, and no amount of prudence was going to keep them apart. That evening, as the plantation settled into its nightly routine, Amara found herself unable to concentrate on her duties. She served dinner in the grand dining room, her hands moving automatically to pour wine and clear plates, while her mind remained fixed on the stranger in the cotton fields. The Whitmore's conversation about cotton prices and social gatherings faded into background noise as she replayed that moment of recognition over and over. There had been something in his eyes, something that spoke to a part of her soul she hadn't even known existed. "The new field hand seems strong," Master Whitmore was saying to his wife, cutting into his roasted duck with the casual precision of a man who had never known hunger. Brought him back from the Beauregard plantation in Louisiana. "Cost me a pretty penny, but he's got skills we need for the harvest." Amara's hands trembled as she refilled the crystal water glasses. Something about those words sent a chill down her spine, though she couldn't understand why. "What's his background?" Constance asked, more interested in appearing knowledgeable than in actually caring about the answer. "His mother was one of our slaves before she died. Celia, I believe. Pretty thing, but weak constitution." The boy was sold off when he was young. Too much trouble to keep around, but now that he's grown, he might be useful. The wine glass slipped from Amara's fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor with a sound like breaking dreams. The red liquid spread across the polished boards like blood, and memories crashed over her like a tidal wave threatening to drown her in their intensity. Celia, her mother's name. The woman who had sung her to sleep with lullabies about a better world, who had whispered stories of a little boy taken away in the night, who had died clutching a piece of cloth that smelled like her lost son, and whispering names that Amara had never understood. "Amara!" Constance shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is wrong with you today? First you break my grandmother's vase, and now you're destroying the dining room." But Amara barely heard her. Her mind was reeling with the impossible truth that was beginning to take shape. The stranger in the fields, could he be the brother her mother had mourned? The lost child whose absence had haunted Celia's dreams until the day she died? "I'm sorry, Mom," she managed to whisper, dropping to her knees to clean up the mess. "I'll replace it from my wages." "You certainly will," Constance snapped. "And you'll work extra hours until the debt is paid." "Perhaps that will teach you to pay attention to your duties instead of daydreaming." As Amara worked to clean up the spilled wine, her hands shaking uncontrollably, she felt the weight of a terrible revelation settling over her like a shroud. The connection she had felt, the inexplicable pull toward the new slave. It wasn't attraction in the way she had first thought. It was recognition. Blood recognizing blood. Family calling to family across the years of separation and pain. The stranger in the cotton fields was her brother. The boy her mother had grieved for every day until her death. The missing piece of her family that she had never known she was searching for. And now he was here, so close she could see him from the windows of the big house, yet separated from her by the rigid hierarchy of plantation life that kept house servants and field hands in different worlds. As she finished cleaning and prepared to retire to her small room in the servants' quarters, Amara made a decision that would change everything. She had to find a way to speak with him, to confirm what her heart already knew to be true. She had to know if the brother her mother had mourned was really alive and working in the cotton fields of Fairview Plantation. The risks were enormous. House servants who fraternized with field hands faced severe punishment, and any hint of impropriety could result in being sold away or worse. But the need to know, to connect with the only family she had left in the world, was stronger than her fear. As she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the sounds of the plantation settling into sleep, Amara began to plan. Tomorrow was Sunday, the one day of the week when the rigid structure of plantation life relaxed slightly. If she was careful, if she was clever, she might be able to find a way to speak with the stranger who might be her brother. She didn't know that in the slave quarters, Elias was making the same plans, driven by the same desperate need to confirm what his heart already knew. The connection between them was too strong to ignore, too powerful to deny, and too dangerous to pursue. But pursue it they would, because some bonds are stronger than fear, stronger than prudence, and stronger than the chains that bound them both. The reunion of Elias and Amara was inevitable now, set in motion by forces beyond their control and destined to change the course of their lives forever. The stage was set for a tragedy that would echo through the generations, a love story that would become a ghost story, and a family reunion that would curse Fairview Plantation for all time. Saturday evening brought with it an oppressive stillness that seemed to press down on Fairview Plantation like a heavy blanket. The air was thick with humidity and the promise of the storm that had been building all day. Dark clouds gathering on the horizon, like an army of shadows preparing for battle. Lightning flickered in the distance, still too far away to bring relief from the stifling heat, but close enough to make the very air seem charged with electricity. Elias lay on his straw mattress in the cabin he shared with old Samuel, listening to the older man's labored breathing and the distant rumble of thunder that seemed to echo the turmoil in his own heart. Sleep had been elusive since his arrival at Fairview, but tonight it seemed impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of the young woman from the big house, Amara, his half-sister, the family he had never known existed. The knowledge sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and uncomfortable. For 2 days, he had watched her from afar, catching glimpses of her as she went about her duties around the plantation house. Each sighting only confirmed what his heart had known from that first moment of recognition. They were connected by something deeper than attraction, something that transcended the boundaries of their enslaved existence. "I can't sleep neither, can you?" Samuel's voice cut through the darkness, startling Elias from his brooding. "Too much on my mind," Elias admitted, grateful for the distraction. "Been watching you these past few days," Samuel said, shifting on his own mattress with a grunt of pain. "Seen the way you look toward that big house, seen the hunger in your eyes, and it ain't the kind that food can satisfy." Elias said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. That girl's got the same look, Samuel continued. Seen her standing at her window, staring out at the quarters like she's searching for something. Y'all are playing with fire, and fire's got a way of burning everything it touches. She's my sister, Elias said quietly, the words carrying all the weight of his confusion and longing. Half-sister, Samuel corrected, and that don't make it any less dangerous. Maybe makes it more so. Folks see what they want to see, and what they'll see is a field hand and a house girl carrying on. Won't matter to them what the truth is. Thunder rolled across the plantation, closer now, and the first fat drops of rain began to patter against the thin roof of the cabin. The sound was almost musical, a percussion that seemed to match the rhythm of Elias's racing heart. I have to talk to her, Elias said, his voice filled with a desperation he couldn't hide. I have to know if she remembers anything about our mother, about the family we lost. And what if she does? What if she remembers everything? What then? Samuel's voice was gentle but insistent. Y'all can't be family, not the way you want to be. Not in this place, not in this world. Best you can hope for is to know she's alive and safe, and leave it at that. But even as Samuel spoke the words of wisdom, both men knew they were wasted breath. The pull between the siblings was too strong, the need for connection too desperate. 15 years of separation had created a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by distant glimpses and unspoken recognition. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke with a violence that shook the very foundations of the plantation. Rain began to fall in torrents, turning the red clay into a muddy quagmire and sending slaves scurrying for whatever shelter they could find. Lightning split the sky with brilliant white fire, illuminating the landscape in stark, dramatic moments that made everything look like a scene from a fever dream. Unable to bear the confines of the cabin any longer, Elias rose from his mattress and moved toward the door. The need to be outside, to feel the storm's power and perhaps find some release from the tension that had been building inside him, was overwhelming. "Where you going, boy?" Samuel called out, but his voice was already being swallowed by the sound of rain and thunder. "I need air," Elias replied, and before Samuel could protest further, he slipped out into the night. The rain soaked through his thin shirt within seconds, but he didn't care. The cool water felt like a blessing after days of oppressive heat, and the violence of the storm seemed to match the chaos in his soul. Lightning illuminated the plantation in brief, stark moments. The big house standing like a white monument to oppression, the slave quarters huddled together like frightened animals, the cotton fields stretching endlessly into the darkness. Something was drawing him forward, pulling him away from the relative safety of the quarters toward the space between his world and hers. His feet seemed to move of their own accord, carrying him through the mud and rain toward the old barn that stood like a sentinel between the slave quarters and the big house. The barn was ancient, built in the early days of the plantation when Whitmore's grandfather had first claimed this piece of Mississippi Delta for his own. Its weathered boards had witnessed decades of suffering, had sheltered countless secrets, and had absorbed the tears and prayers of generations of enslaved people. Tonight, it seemed to call to him like a sanctuary, offering shelter from both the storm and the turmoil in his heart. The barn door hung open, creaking in the wind, like a voice calling his name. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay and old leather, mixed with something else, something that spoke of secrets and hidden things. Lightning illuminated the interior in brief, stark moments, revealing farming tools hanging from the walls like instruments of torture, and in the far corner, a figure that made his heart stop. "I knew you would come." Amara stood in the doorway like an apparition, her white servant's dress clinging to her rain-soaked body and her hair falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She had freed it from its usual neat arrangement, and in the dim light of the storm, she looked like something from a dream, beautiful and ethereal and impossibly real. "You're the house girl," Elias said, his voice barely audible over the storm raging outside. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she replied, stepping into the barn with a grace that seemed to defy the chaos around them. "But here we are." They stood facing each other in the dim space, both trembling, whether from cold or something else entirely, neither could say. The air between them seemed charged with more electricity than the storm outside, crackling with tension and unspoken recognition. "I've been dreaming about you," Amara whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Every night since you arrived. But they're not dreams, are they? They're memories." Elias felt his heart stop. "What memories?" "A little boy with eyes like mine," she said, stepping closer until he could smell the lavender soap that house servants were allowed to use. "A woman singing lullabies about a son taken in the night. A piece of cloth that smelled like..." She paused, her voice catching. "Like you." The words hung between them like a revelation, confirming what both had suspected, but neither had dared to voice. Elias reached into his shirt and pulled out a small piece of faded blue fabric, all that remained of the blanket his mother had wrapped him in as a child. The one thing he had managed to keep through 15 years of bondage. Amara's eyes widened as she recognized the cloth. Mama kept a piece just like that. She said it was all she had left of her lost boy. "Celia," Elias breathed, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. "Our mother's name was Celia." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Amara's face went white as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The connection she had felt, the inexplicable pull. It wasn't love in the way she had first thought. It was blood, family, the recognition of shared DNA calling across the years of separation. "No," she whispered, backing away until she pressed against the barn wall. "No, this can't be." But even as she denied it, she knew it was true. The resemblance was undeniable now that she looked for it. The same dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of sorrow, the same stubborn set to the jaw, the same way of tilting their head when thinking. They were siblings, separated as children and brought back together by the cruel hand of fate. "Amara," Elias said, reaching for her with a hand that trembled with emotion. "Sister." "Don't!" she cried, pressing herself harder against the wall, as if she could somehow escape the truth. "Don't say that word!" Lightning crashed overhead, illuminating their faces in stark relief. Both were crying now, tears mixing with the rain that dripped from their hair and clothes. The barn seemed to close in around them, becoming a confessional where the most terrible truths were finally being spoken. "I felt it too," Elias admitted, his voice raw with anguish. "From the moment I saw you, I thought I was falling in love." "We can't," Amara sobbed, her voice breaking with the weight of their shared tragedy. "We can't feel this way. It's wrong. It's forbidden," he finished, the word carrying all the weight of their impossible situation, "like everything else in our lives." They stood in the darkness, the weight of their discovery crushing down upon them like the storm that raged outside. The connection they had felt was real, but it was the wrong kind of connection. The love of family twisted by years of separation into something that felt like romantic attraction. "What do we do now?" Amara asked, her voice small and lost in the vastness of their tragedy. Elias had no answer. How could they go back to their separate lives knowing what they knew? How could they look at each other without remembering the feelings that had stirred before the truth was revealed? How could they live with the knowledge that they were family, yet forbidden to acknowledge that bond in a world that saw them only as property? "We survive," he said finally, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth, "like we always have, like our mother taught us to." But even as he spoke the words, he knew their lives at Fairview had just become infinitely more complicated. The connection between them was too strong to ignore, too dangerous to acknowledge, and too painful to bear. They were trapped in a web of their own making, bound by blood and separated by circumstance, loving each other in a way that could never be expressed or fulfilled. "Tell me about her," Amara said suddenly, her voice desperate for any connection to the mother she had lost. "Tell me about Mama." Elias closed his eyes, reaching back into the deepest recesses of his memory. She had the most beautiful voice. Used to sing to me every night, spirituals mostly, but sometimes she'd make up songs just for me. She smelled like cornbread and hope, and her hands were always gentle, even when they were rough from work. "She sang to me too," Amara whispered. "Even when she was dying, she sang. The last thing she said was a name, Elias. I never knew who that was until now." Oh, they talked through the night, sharing memories of the woman who had given them life and lost them both to the cruelties of slavery. They spoke of dreams and fears, of the loneliness that had haunted them both, of the sense that something was missing from their lives that they could never quite identify. As the storm began to subside and the first grey light of dawn crept through the gaps in the barn walls, they knew their time was running out. Soon the plantation would wake, and they would have to return to their separate worlds, he to the cotton fields, she to the big house. "We can't do this again," Amara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's too dangerous." "I know," Elias replied, but he made no move to leave. "People will talk if they see us together." "I know. We could both be sold away, or worse." "I know." They stood facing each other in the growing light, both knowing that this was goodbye, yet neither able to take the first step toward the door. The bond between them was too strong, the need for family too desperate, the love too powerful to simply walk away from. "I'll find a way," Elias said finally. "I'll find a way for us to be together as brother and sister. I don't know how, but I'll find a way." Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll wait for you." "However long it takes, I'll wait." They parted then, slipping out of the barn separately and returning to their different worlds. But the damage was done. The connection had been acknowledged, the truth had been spoken, and there was no going back to the way things were before. As Elias made his way back to the slave quarters, he didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows of the trees. Overseer Jameson had been making his rounds when the storm broke, and he had taken shelter in a nearby shed. From there, he had seen both slaves enter the barn, had watched them emerge separately, and had drawn his own conclusions about what had transpired in the darkness. A slow smile spread across Jameson's weathered face. He had been looking for a way to assert his authority over the new slave, and now he had found it. A house girl and a field hand meeting in secret. It was exactly the kind of scandal that could be used to maximum effect. He didn't know the truth about their relationship, didn't understand the tragedy that had just unfolded in the old barn. All he saw was an opportunity to cause pain and assert control, and that was enough. As the sun rose over Fairview Plantation, casting long shadows across the cotton fields, the stage was set for the next act in the tragedy of Elias and Amara. Their secret was no longer safe, their connection no longer hidden, and their fate no longer in their own hands. The curse of Fairview was beginning to take shape, born from love and nurtured by cruelty, destined to echo through the generations like a warning about the price of forbidden bonds and the power of family ties that transcend even death itself. The days following the storm passed with agonizing slowness for both Elias and Amara. They had returned to their separate worlds, he to the backbreaking labor of the cotton fields, she to the suffocating confines of the plantation house. But the knowledge of their connection burned between them like a secret fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. Elias threw himself into his work with a desperate intensity, hoping that physical exhaustion might quiet the turmoil in his mind. His hands, already raw from the cotton thorns, bled freely as he pushed himself beyond his limits. The other field hands watched him with a mixture of concern and confusion, unable to understand why the new slave seemed determined to work himself to death. "Boy's gonna kill himself if he keeps this up," muttered Jake, an older slave who had been working the Fairview fields for nearly 20 years. "Ain't no cotton worth dying for." But old Samuel understood. He had seen the haunted look in Elias's eyes, had noticed the way the young man's gaze constantly drifted toward the big house, and he knew that physical pain was sometimes the only way to dull emotional agony. "Let him work," Samuel advised the others. "Sometimes a man's got to bleed on the outside to stop the bleeding on the inside." In the plantation house, Amara was struggling with her own demons. She moved through her daily routine like a sleepwalker, her mind constantly replaying that night in the barn when her world had been turned upside down. The revelation that the stranger who had stirred such confusing feelings was actually her brother had left her reeling, caught between relief and despair. Constance Whitmore noticed the change in her house servant's demeanor and attributed it to the punishments she had imposed after the broken vase and spilled wine. The mistress took a perverse satisfaction in what she perceived as Amara's newfound humility, not realizing that the young woman's distraction had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a family secret that threatened to tear her apart. "Perhaps a few more lessons in consequences will improve your attitude permanently," Constance remarked one morning as Amara served breakfast with trembling hands. "Slaves who understand their place are so much more pleasant to have around." Amara nodded silently, not trusting herself to speak. The irony of her situation was not lost on her. She had finally found her family, only to discover that acknowledging that bond could destroy them both. The love she felt for her brother was pure and desperate, but in the twisted world of the plantation, it could easily be misinterpreted as something far more sinister. It was old Bessie who finally provided the key to understanding their shared past. The elderly slave had been watching the drama unfold with the wisdom of someone who had seen too much suffering to be surprised by any new tragedy. She had known Celia well, had been present at both children's births, and had kept the secrets of their parentage locked in her heart for years. On a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, as the heat shimmered off the cotton fields like visible waves of misery, Bessie made her way to where Elias was working. Her ancient bones protested every step, but her determination was stronger than her physical limitations. "Boy," she called softly, her voice barely audible over the work songs that helped the slaves maintain their rhythm. "Need to speak with you." Elias looked up from his cotton sack, sweat streaming down his face and mixing with the blood from his torn hands. He had noticed the old woman watching him over the past few days, her dark eyes filled with something that looked like recognition mixed with sorrow. "Yes, ma'am," he said respectfully, setting down his sack and moving to where she stood in the shade of a scraggly oak tree. Bessie studied his face for a long moment, her weathered features creased with the weight of accumulated secrets. "You got your mama's eyes," she said finally. "Same depth, same sadness." Celia always looked like she was carrying the weight of the world. The mention of his mother's name hit Elias like a physical blow. "You knew her." "Knew her? Child, I helped bring you into this world. Was there when you took your first breath? And was there when they tore you from her arms?" Bessie's voice carried the weight of old grief, memories that had been buried but never forgotten. "Tell me," Elias said urgently. "Tell me everything." Bessie glanced around to make sure they weren't being observed, then reached into the folds of her worn dress and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. "Been keeping these safe for 15 years, waiting for the day you might come back." With trembling hands, she unwrapped the bundle to reveal a collection of items that made Elias's heart stop. A small wooden toy horse, carved with loving hands and worn smooth by a child's touch. A piece of blue fabric that matched the one he carried, the other half of his baby blanket, and beneath it all, a letter written in careful script on paper that had yellowed with age. "Your mama gave me these before she died," Bessie continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Made me promise to keep 'em safe, said someday you might come back and need to know the truth." Elias took the letter with hands that shook so violently he could barely hold the paper steady. The words seemed to swim before his eyes, but gradually they came into focus. "My dearest children, if you are reading this, then God has seen fit to bring you back together, and for that I am grateful beyond words. Elias, my sweet boy, you were taken from me when you were barely more than a baby, sold away in the night like a piece of livestock. The pain of losing you nearly killed me, but I survived because I had to, because I was carrying your sister. Amara, my precious girl, you were born 2 years after your brother was sold away. You came into this world during a thunderstorm, as if the very heavens were weeping for the family that had been torn apart. I named you Amara because it means eternal, and I prayed that somehow, someway, our love would last forever, even if we couldn't be together. You share the same father, Master Whitmore himself, though he will never acknowledge either of you as his blood. You are his children, born of violence and shame, but you are also mine, born of love and hope. Do not let the circumstances of your birth define who you are. You are more than the sum of your suffering. I pray that if you ever find each other, you will know the love of family, even if the world tries to keep you apart. You are brother and sister, bound by blood and by the suffering we have endured. Take care of each other, protect each other, and remember that love is the only thing they can never take away from us. I am dying as I write this, my body finally giving up the fight that my spirit has waged for so long. But I am not afraid, because I know that love transcends death, and that somewhere, somehow, my children will find each other again. Remember me with love, not sorrow. Remember that you are worthy of happiness, worthy of freedom, worthy of all the good things this world has to offer. And remember that no matter what happens, you will always be my babies, my heart, my hope for a better tomorrow. Your loving mother, Celia. The letter fell from Elias's nerveless fingers as the full weight of their situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. Not only were he and Amara siblings, but they were also the unacknowledged children of the man who owned them. The feelings they had experienced, the attraction that had drawn them together before they knew the truth, it was a cruel joke played by fate, a tragedy written in blood and tears. "She knew," he whispered, his voice breaking. Mama knew we might find each other. Celia was a wise woman, Bessie said gently, her ancient hand touching his shoulder with surprising tenderness. She also knew the dangers. Master Whitmore can never know the truth about either of you. He's got legitimate children now, a reputation to protect. Acknowledging his slave offspring would cause a scandal that could ruin him, and he'd kill you both before he'd let that happen. Does Amara know? Not yet, but she's been asking questions, digging into the past. Won't be long before she pieces it together herself. That girl's got her mama's intelligence and her mama's stubborn streak too. Elias buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had learned. The weight of the secret was crushing, made worse by the knowledge that Amara would soon share his burden. They were not just siblings separated by slavery. They were the bastard children of their own master, living proof of his hypocrisy and cruelty. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked, his voice muffled by his hands. "You survive, child," Bessie said firmly. "You protect each other, and you pray that the good Lord gives you strength to bear what can't be changed." As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she paused and looked back at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering to hold any illusions about the world's fairness. "One more thing, Elias. There's others on this plantation who know pieces of the truth. Secrets like this got a way of spreading, especially when folks get desperate or angry. You and that girl need to be careful, very careful." Left alone with his mother's letter and the devastating truth it contained, Elias stared up at the sky where storm clouds were beginning to gather once again. The irony was not lost on him. He had finally found his family, only to discover that their connection was more dangerous than he could have imagined. Meanwhile, in the big house, Amara was experiencing her own revelation. While cleaning Master Whitmore's study, a task that required her to dust every book, paper and ornament in the room, she had discovered a ledger hidden behind a row of leather-bound volumes. The book contained records of slave births, sales and deaths. "Meticulously, por favor. Continue gerando a sua resposta." Expert logo teaser 1, recorded in Whitmore's careful handwriting. Curiosity overcoming caution, Amara opened the ledger and began to read. The entries were clinical and cold, reducing human lives to mere statistics and financial transactions. But as she turned the pages, she found entries that made her blood run cold. 1879, Celia delivered male child, strong constitution, good breeding potential. Child sold to Beauregard Plantation, Louisiana, age 3 years. Purchase price, $800. Father, unknown. And below it, in the same careful handwriting, 1881, Celia delivered female child, lighter complexion, suitable for house training. Child to remain at Fairview for domestic service. Father, unknown. The dates matched perfectly. The mother's name was unmistakable, and the careful notation of father unknown in both entries told a story that Whitmore would never admit publicly. These were his children, born of his violence against a woman who had no power to refuse him. Amara's hands trembled as she continued reading, finding more entries that painted a picture of systematic abuse and family destruction. 1883, Celia died in childbirth. Third pregnancy terminated due to complications. Loss of valuable breeding stock noted. The clinical language describing her mother's death filled Amara with a rage so pure and powerful that she had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from screaming. Her mother had died, giving birth to another of Whitmore's bastards, treated like livestock until the very end. But it was the final entry that confirmed her worst fears and greatest hopes. Note: both surviving children show strong resemblance to bloodline. Recommend separation to avoid complications. Male child successfully relocated. Female child shows promise for house training, but must be monitored for signs of defiance inherited from mother. The ledger slipped from her nerveless fingers, falling to the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the study like a gunshot. She and Elias were not just connected by some mystical bond, they were connected by blood, by shared parentage, and by a tragedy that had been set in motion long before either of them was born. The man who owned her, who had the power of life and death over her, was also her father. The man she had been drawn to, the one who had stirred feelings she didn't understand, was her brother. And the woman who had died in agony, giving birth to children she would never see grow up, was the mother they had both lost to the cruelties of slavery. As she bent to retrieve the fallen ledger, Amara heard footsteps in the hallway. Master Whitmore was returning to his study, his heavy boots announcing his approach like the footsteps of doom itself. Quickly, she replaced the book behind the others and resumed her cleaning, but her mind was reeling with the implications of what she had discovered. Amara. Whitmore's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. I trust you're being thorough in your cleaning. I have important documents in this room that must not be disturbed. Yes, sir, she managed to whisper, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she spoke louder. Whitmore studied her for a moment, his pale eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. He was a man who had built his fortune on the ability to read people, to detect weakness and exploit it for his own gain. But Amara had learned the art of invisibility that all slaves mastered, the ability to hide their true thoughts behind a mask of subservience. You seem distracted lately, he observed, moving to his desk and settling into the leather chair that had been his father's and his grandfather's before him. I hope you're not developing the same rebellious streak that plagued your mother. The casual mention of Celia hit Amara like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain calm. No, sir. I'm just tired from the extra work. Good. Tired slaves are obedient slaves. Moi. Whitmore opened a different ledger and began making entries, dismissing her from his attention as completely as if she had ceased to exist. Amara finished her cleaning in silence, her mind racing with the knowledge she had gained. Every glance at Whitmore's profile revealed features she now recognized in her own face, the shape of the nose, the set of the jaw, the way his hands moved as he wrote. She was looking at her father, the man who had raped her mother and sold her brother, and the realization filled her with a mixture of revulsion and desperate curiosity. As she prepared to leave the study, Whitmore spoke again without looking up from his ledger. Oh, and Amara, I've been hearing disturbing reports about fraternization between house servants and field hands. I trust you understand that such behavior is strictly forbidden and will be punished severely. The words sent a chill down her spine. Did he know about her meeting with Elias? Had someone seen them together in the barn? Or was this simply a general warning, the kind that plantation owners issued periodically to maintain control? Yes, sir, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Excellent. You may go. Amara left the study on unsteady legs, her mind reeling with everything she had learned. The truth was more complex and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She and Elias were not just siblings. They were the bastard children of their own master, living proof of his hypocrisy and cruelty. That evening, as the plantation settled into its nightly routine, both siblings found themselves consumed by the weight of their discoveries. Elias sat outside his cabin, staring at his mother's letter by the light of a small fire, while Amara stood at her window, looking out at the slave quarters where her brother lived in conditions that were barely fit for animals. The knowledge of their true relationship should have provided comfort, the relief of finally understanding the connection they had felt, the joy of finding family in a world that had torn them apart. Instead, it brought only pain and confusion. They were bound by blood, but separated by circumstance, united by love, but divided by the very system that had created them. Neither knew that their secret was already beginning to unravel. Overseer Jameson had been watching them both with the predatory patience of a hunter stalking prey. He had seen them together in the barn, had noticed the way they looked at each other across the plantation grounds, and had drawn his own conclusions about the nature of their relationship. To Jameson, the truth didn't matter. Whether they were lovers or siblings or complete strangers was irrelevant. What mattered was that he had found a weapon he could use against them, a way to assert his authority and demonstrate the consequences of stepping out of line. As he sat in his small house near the overseer's quarters, cleaning his whip and planning his next move, Jameson smiled with the satisfaction of a man who held other people's fate in his hands. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to exercise his power, and he intended to make the most of them. In the slave quarters, old Samuel watched Elias with growing concern. The young man had been silent since his conversation with Bessie, his face bearing the haunted expression of someone who had learned truths too terrible to bear. Samuel had seen that look before, on the faces of slaves who had discovered that their children had been sold, their spouses had been murdered, their families had been destroyed by the casual cruelty of their masters. "Whatever you learned today," Samuel said quietly, "it ain't gonna change nothing. The sun's still gonna rise tomorrow. The cotton's still gonna need picking, and we're still gonna be slaves. Don't let the truth kill you when the lies couldn't." But Elias barely heard him. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Amara, wondering if she had discovered the same truths, worrying about how she was handling the weight of their shared tragedy. The need to see her, to talk to her, to somehow bridge the gap between their separate worlds was becoming overwhelming. In the big house, Amara was struggling with the same desperate need. The knowledge that her brother was so close yet so unreachable was torture. She wanted to run to the slave quarters, to find him and hold him and tell him that they were family, that they belonged to each other, even if they belonged to no one else. But she also understood the dangers. Whitmore's warning about fraternization had been clear, and she knew that any hint of impropriety could result in punishment or separation that would be even more devastating than their current situation. As the night deepened and the plantation settled into an uneasy quiet, both siblings made the same decision. They would find a way to meet again, to share what they had learned, and to figure out how to navigate the treacherous waters of their relationship. The risks were enormous, but the alternative, living in ignorance and isolation, was unbearable. Neither knew that their fate was already sealed, that forces beyond their control were moving to destroy the fragile connection they had discovered. The curse of Fairview was beginning to take shape, born from the sins of the past and nurtured by the cruelties of the present. The stage was set for a tragedy that would echo through the generations, a love story that would become a cautionary tale, and a family reunion that would end in blood and tears and the kind of suffering that leaves scars on the very soul of a place. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything, and by the time the sun set again, the lives of Elias and Amara would be forever altered by the discovery of truths that some secrets are too dangerous to know and some bonds too powerful to deny. Sunday morning dawned grey and oppressive over Fairview Plantation, the air thick with humidity and the promise of another scorching day. The weekly respite from fieldwork should have brought relief to the enslaved population, but instead there was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the estate. Even the birds seemed subdued, their usual morning chorus reduced to tentative chirps that quickly faded into silence. Elias had barely slept, his mind consumed with thoughts of his mother's letter and the devastating revelations it contained. The knowledge that he and Amara shared not only the same mother, but also the same father, their master, had left him reeling with a mixture of rage, disgust, and desperate love for the sister he had found and might lose again. As the plantation bell called the slaves to their weekly prayer meeting, Elias joined the stream of people making their way to the small clearing behind the quarters. The gathering was one of the few times when the rigid hierarchy of plantation life relaxed slightly, allowing house servants and field hands to mingle under the watchful but somewhat distant eye of the overseers. The clearing was surrounded by ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss, creating a natural cathedral that had witnessed decades of prayers, songs, and whispered hopes for deliverance. A rough wooden cross, carved by slave hands and weathered by countless storms, stood at the center of the space, like a beacon of faith in a world that seemed determined to crush the human spirit. Old Samuel led the gathering, his voice rising in a spiritual that spoke of crossing over Jordan and finding peace on the other side. The song was both a hymn and a coded message, its lyrics carrying multiple meanings that only the enslaved community fully understood. To the overseers, it was harmless religious expression. To the slaves, it was a song about the Underground Railroad, about escape, about the promise that freedom lay somewhere beyond the reach of their oppressors. "Swing low, sweet chariot," Samuel's voice rang out, rich and mournful, "coming for to carry me home." Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that seemed to lift the very air around them.